Morton thought for a second and punched in some data into his datapad. Semi-translucent green grass grew up around the cairn, stopping at about halfway up the horse dragon's legs. The cairn looked down and pondered its new situation. He turned around 3 times, then flumped down, laying there more in the style of a dragon than a horse. Vanquisher. The word, or rather, possibly a name, appeared in Morton's mind. He put his hand on the outward-facing portion of the cell and felt courage. The word appeared on top of the quarantine cell, designating it as Vanquisher. Morton nodded and withdrew his hand. Vanquisher's eyes closed as he lay nearly perfectly camouflaged in the electronic grass. Shimmering green grass. Morton looked around and checked his schedule clock on his tablet. He was done checking the quarantine area, and the system should have gone to sleep by now. It hadn't. Morton went back to his command center. As his tablet vanished from his hands, he went to sit back down in his chair. He looked over the monitors, and there was still activity from the radio tower. The fiery wall was still burning hot. Morton tried to look at the data that was coming through it, but it was encrypted. It wasn't a lot of data, but the volume was steadily increasing. Morton frowned. He didn't like this at all. Morton tried to think of prior instances of this happening, and he couldn't. Morton set out to take a sample of the data coming in so he could further analyze it in the lab. A lab coat materialized around him, along with some tools. He went to the radio tower and saw the code coming in. It wasn't doing anything but sitting there. Code normally came in and then went to the application it was supposed to go to, but this wasn't. Morton got out a little bag that looked like a miniature of the quarantine cells and opened it. He got out a weaponized, tactical-looking meat cleaver and pressed a button on it that electrified the beefy tool. Morton found a piece of malignant code that seemed to be hanging and lopped it off. He held the bag out and the code dropped into the bag with a plop. Morton immediately zip-sealed the bag before the piece of code realized what happened. The bag retained what was coming in and out of that piece of code and kept it placated, thinking it was still in the routine. The cleaver he used kept the piece of code neutralized for a second so it wouldn't gain awareness that it was now missing a piece of code. There was a flicker wireframe facsimile where the missing piece of code was hanging off the larger code blob, then the piece of code flickered back into existence as if nothing happened seconds later. The duplicate piece of code remained in Morton's bag for later analysis, being none the wiser. This was the only time that Morton would be able to perform the action with a low risk. Right now, as the data was moving back and forth, there was only a check on whether or not that specific piece of data had moved. Whatever was sending it wouldn't do a full check of the entire package until it was complete. There was no way for a self-destruct timer or anything like that on this little piece yet. Morton had no idea when that could happen as the header data was encrypted. After lunch, afternoon, day 1. Morton got the piece of data back to the laboratory and set it into a machine that scooted it under some analysis equipment via conveyor belt. The bag kept the code in a suspended state so it didn't self-destruct on him. He was careful to cut around the header and footer of it so it wasn't sitting there waiting for something. There were so many risks, like it being on a timer, or it having some kind of internal kill switch. Morton avoided all that, though, by getting the raw piece of code without all of its responsible bits. Morton set the system to automatically upload the code to the knowledge base in a protected capsule along with all the timestamps and an estimate of the overall file size and growth rate. Morton went back into his command center and tried to reach out to the task manager to see if there was any way on the server end to see when this ever-increasing file was going to be done so he could analyze it properly before its release into the system. The task manager got back to him after a few minutes and told him there was no file coming through. No applications were waiting for a file. No data was coming through that needed to go to a file. Nada. Morton sent copies of the logs to the task manager for review. The task manager responded that it had no records of no such logs coming through on the server side. Then it must be a reporting error since nothing can directly come through without the server knowing about it. Morton asked the task manager what the recommendations were for this, if theoretically it was happening. The task manager responded to check with the local policy manager. Morton checked with the policy manager. The policy manager responded that it didn't even care. Morton checked through the settings, and there was nothing about whether the Wi-Fi should be enabled or not, simply that it was. Morton checked back with the task manager. The task manager was out of ideas and gave Morton approval to talk to the knowledge base. It was time for Walden to get back from lunch, but he hadn't returned. The code was still blobbing up around the radio tower, but it hadn't materialized into whatever it was, and showed no signs of slowing down. In fact, it might even be speeding up. Perhaps whoever is sending the data boosted their signal or got closer, Morton pondered, but realized there was nothing he could do about it. Morton checked his datapad, which materialized out of nowhere upon command. It reported that the sample couldn't be sent. Morton poked his head out from around his monitors, and the gunk being Wi-Fi'd in it started to gum up around the backside of the fiery wall. Normally data was flowing through so seamlessly that Morton couldn't even consciously see it, only detect it with his passive and automated systems. Currently, instead, the data was starting to slow down so much he could actually see each piece come in, rather than the usual blur. Morton had seen this before, but it was only ever when there was a lot of network traffic, not a lot of internal data layer traffic. He knew he would have to wait in line forever for the gunk to get out of the internet going that route, so to try to find alternative ideas, he started looking through the user manual at his desk. Morton found documentation of a port that was very far away, something about a backdoor directly to the knowledge base. He never used it before because the nearby portal was so convenient and the preferred method. As Morton walked to the lab, he started to feel sluggish for a second, like he was being drained a bit. To get a system report, Morton popped his datapad out of thin air and rerouted more of the computer cycles to himself. Morton's suspicions were correct. Something was starting to bog the system down. Morton got to the lab and found that the analysis was done on the specimen captured from the unidentified blob. The cell container had been transferred over to quarantine, and in the little tray on the machine was a pill with a bolt around it. Morton wouldn't be able to unlock this. Nobody local could, in fact. This was only for the knowledge base to look at in the sandbox environment. He put it in his pocket and started heading back to the command center. When Morton got about halfway back to the command center, when a horrible surrounding deep alarm started echoing through his facility. He looked up at the sky, as this alarm was a new sight to Morton. He looked over at his command center to see now that it was half covered in goop. Morton tried to get back to the facility. If he could get back in, he could hide inside and harden the facility until someone came to check on him. He was moving so slow, though, that he calculated there would be no way to get back in time. The glob had encompassed the majority of the building. Morton rerouted all of the CPU cycles to him and nearly could move at full speed again. His memory was becoming a fog. He was trying to remember why he was trying to get back into the building, but couldn't. Morton found a side entrance that landed him in the quarantine area, but couldn't remember why he had gone there to begin with. He saw the quarantine cells and remembered that he liked to look at them and walked over to the one. Eventually he got to the one with nice growing grass. A glowing title above the kiosk that said Vanquisher. "Hello, buddy," Morton spoke as if he was extremely tired and wanted to take a nap, and tapped on the cell wall. Light rippled off in all directions, and there was a thunking bzzz noise associated. Vanquisher woke up and took a second to register. He tiredly blinked his eyes, and then they opened really wide. The green horse dragon started running around in circles and bonking at the inner cell walls with his hooves. "Easy there, fella," Morton said. "I can't let you out, remember?" His speech started to slur badly. Morton looked around and saw a beating pink heart program in another cell. It seemed to call to him with promises of love. "Aw, I love you too, but I can't let you out." Morton looked at the ad. "Aw, why would a harmless ad be put in here? That doesn't make any sense." He put his hands towards it, then flinched, remembering something, but unsure as to what. Out of habit and routine, Morton went to walk back to his office. Surely he thought he would have remembered what he was doing then. Unfortunately, there was an inner door before, and it was now just blobby, unfinished code. Morton touched it and pulled his hand out of it slowly, and it was sticky. He wiped his hand off on his trousers and slid it off, and it plopped onto the ground. Morton didn't remember that being there before, so now he wasn't sure. He needed to retrace his steps, so he went back past the cells one by one.